If you're a kid, leave the video right now.
I arrested?
Yeah.
Why? Because he's dead.
It began with a theme song, a burst of guitar riffs, 5 color-coded warriors standing tall against evil. But behind the helmets, behind the action figures and the TV screens, there was a different kind of story. One that didn't make it into the script. A story of lights, fame, and shadows. This is not just about nostalgia, it's about a legacy, fractured, complicated, and painfully human. From record-breaking ratings to backstage turmoil, from criminal charges to unspeakable tragedy, this is the story the franchise never told. And it's one you won't forget. It began with a theme song, a burst of guitar riffs, 5 color-coded warriors standing tall against evil. But behind the helmets, behind the action figures and the TV screens, there was a different kind of story. One that didn't make it into the script. A story of lights, fame, and shadows. This is not just about nostalgia, it's about a legacy. Fractured, complicated, and painfully human. From record-breaking ratings to backstage turmoil, from criminal charges to unspeakable tragedy. This is the story the franchise never told, and it's one you won't forget. In 1993, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers exploded onto American television like a firework. Live action, bright colors, and martial arts, combined with a formula that had never been seen before in Western children's programming. The mastermind behind it? Haim Saban, a composer turned media mogul who saw something special in a Japanese series called Super Sentai. He bought the rights, recut the footage, added American teens, and created a cultural juggernaut. The idea was simple. Take existing action scenes from Japan, film new scenes with American actors, and blend them into a single episode. The result? Cost-effective, fast-paced, and immediately addictive. The first season averaged nearly 5 million viewers per episode. Merchandise flew off the shelves. Kids screamed, "It's Morphin' time" in schoolyards. The Power Rangers were not just superheroes, they were icons. But while children everywhere were glued to their screens, behind the scenes, the pressure was mounting. The original cast was young, talented, and hungry. But they were also vulnerable. Contracts were thin, pay was minimal, $600 per week for some. Despite global success and massive profits, the actors had little bargaining power. Thuy Trang, the original Yellow Ranger, once publicly criticized the network for exploitation. 3 original cast members left the show after failed contract negotiations. The message was clear: you were replaceable. New actors cycled in, and with them, a darker pattern began to emerge. Stories surfaced, of injuries on set, of exhaustion, of creative control being stripped away. And then, things got worse. As years passed, whispers turned into rumors, and rumors gave way to something darker, a phrase that began to circulate across forums, tabloids, and late-night TV: the Power Rangers curse. It sounds like a myth, like fan fiction. But the real-world tragedies are painfully documented. Thuy Trang, the original Yellow Ranger, died in a car accident in 2001. She was just 27. Her loss rocked fans and former castmates alike. But it was only the beginning. Ricardo Medina Jr., who played a Red Ranger in Power Rangers Wild Force, was arrested in 2015 after fatally stabbing his roommate with a sword. The news headlines were surreal: a Power Ranger charged with manslaughter. Ricardo initially claimed self-defense, but later accepted a plea deal and was sentenced to 6 years in prison. And then there's the heart of the story: Jason David Frank, the Green Ranger, the face of the franchise. He returned to the show more than any other Ranger, appearing in Mighty Morphin, Zeo, Turbo, Dino Thunder, and many anniversary specials. He was a fan favorite, a real martial artist, a symbol of strength. But in November 2022, Jason David Frank was found dead in a Texas hotel room. The cause? Suicide. For millions of fans, it was unfathomable. This was their childhood hero. Invincible, untouchable, immortal, or so they thought. Suddenly, the curse didn't feel like a joke anymore. In the days following Jason's death, tributes poured in. So did questions. Ricardo claimed self-defense, but investigators weren't convinced. He was arrested, released, and rearrested in 2016, this time charged with murder. Eventually, he accepted a plea deal for voluntary manslaughter and was sentenced to 6 years. The headlines were sensational. Power Ranger kills roommate. It felt like fiction, but it wasn't. Some argued Ricardo had been unstable. Others pointed fingers at the franchise itself, saying the culture of violence, martial arts, and fantasy blurred reality for its cast. In court, prosecutors painted a darker picture: a volatile actor, an impulsive response, a life taken. The fans divided. Some raised money for Ricardo's legal defense, others mourned Sutter. But for everyone, it was another crack in the Power Rangers mythos. As stories like Medina's and Jason David Frank's piled up, journalists began to dig. Was there really a curse? Or were these isolated tragedies made larger by nostalgia? Some turned to statistics. Most of the hundreds of actors involved in the show had perfectly normal lives, but a few high-profile cases, suicides, violence, addiction, tainted the legacy. Podcasts ran multi-episode deep dives. YouTube channels debated theories. Fan forums lit up. Some blamed the grueling schedules. Others pointed to how fame, when given too fast and taken too soon, can break a person. And somewhere in the middle, a darker truth emerged. For many young actors, Power Rangers wasn't the dream, it was the trap. For millions, Jason David Frank wasn't just a Power Ranger, he was the Power Ranger. Green Ranger, White Ranger, Red Ranger, Black Ranger. He was the face of the franchise for decades, charismatic, athletic, fan-focused. He broke boards at conventions, he signed autographs for hours. He even returned for later seasons, long after many had moved on. But in 2022, fans were blindsided. Jason David Frank was found dead in a Texas hotel room. Cause of death? Suicide. It didn't feel real. He had just been seen at Comic-Con. He had just launched a new project, Legend of the White Dragon, his own creation. But beneath the smiles and high kicks was a man in pain. According to close friends, Jason had been battling depression. He felt trapped between who he was and who people needed him to be. He wore a smile for fans, but in private, he struggled with loss, divorce, and years of internal pressure. He had once told a friend, "I just don't want to be remembered as that guy in spandex. I want to matter." And he did. Fans around the world lit candles, wrote tributes, and shared stories. Of meet and greets that turned into therapy sessions. Of Jason staying on the phone with a struggling fan for 2 hours. Of the Ranger, who made everyone feel like the hero. But even he couldn't always feel like one himself. After Jason's death, questions echoed through the community. Was this a curse? Was it the fame? Or was it the silence? Because silence had become the theme. So many former Rangers had kept their struggles quiet, out of pride, out of fear, out of not wanting to disappoint fans. It's the price of being a childhood icon. You're not allowed to be human. After Jason, others began to speak up. Amy Jo Johnson, the original Pink Ranger, posted heartfelt messages about grief and mental health. Walter Jones, the Black Ranger, reminded fans that our heroes hurt too. The Ranger family, on screen and off, was hurting, but this time, they weren't hiding it. In the aftermath of Ricardo Medina Jr.'s case, the legal system moved slowly but steadily. Prosecutors knew the headlines would be bigger than the trial itself. The courtroom wasn't just filled with jurors, it was filled with childhood nostalgia. But that didn't change the facts. Medina's attorneys argued self-defense. The prosecution showed evidence of escalation. Ultimately, he pled down, not because he was innocent, but because the weight of the case would have crushed him in trial. He served several years, and then faded into obscurity. There were no red carpets, no welcome home signs, just silence. Another fallen Ranger, another broken legacy. As more stories unraveled, the Power Rangers brand found itself at a crossroads. Once a symbol of childhood heroism, it was now entangled in headlines about crime, corruption, and tragedy. Parents asked, should my kids be watching this? Fans asked, did the show create the darkness or just attract it? And critics didn't hold back. Some called it the Power Rangers curse, a string of misfortunes, untimely deaths, and psychological breakdowns tied to the franchise. Others said it was just Hollywood, rebranded in spandex. But behind the scenes, insiders saw something deeper. The production was grueling. Contracts were strict. Cast members were often overworked, underpaid, and easily replaced. The show had launched in the early 90s on a shoestring budget. Filming was relentless, 70 to 100 scenes a day. No union protections, no residuals, just a fast-paced machine built for ratings. Most actors were young. Some had no agents. Few knew how to negotiate, and when they were cut, they were cut. No goodbye party, no media tour, just another name erased from the credits. The deeper you go, the more clear it becomes. Being a ranger was never just about acting. It was about endurance, physical, emotional, financial. For some, it opened doors, but for others, it led to breakdowns. Take the story of Eric Frank, Jason David Frank's real-life brother. A quiet presence, rarely seen on camera. He battled illness, depression, and died young, his passing quietly acknowledged but deeply felt. Jason blamed himself. He carried that weight for years. Or look at Thuy Trang, the original Yellow Ranger. She died in a car crash at just 27. She wasn't a headline, she was a warning, the kind that doesn't make it into convention speeches or fan merch. Still, not everything was dark. For all its turmoil, Power Rangers meant something. To fans, it was a world where teenagers had power, where diversity was celebrated, where good triumphed every time. Kids who felt invisible saw themselves in the Rangers. Kids who were bullied, silenced, or scared found strength in those color-coded heroes. And that's what made the real-life stories so hard to accept, because the heroes weren't invincible. They bled, they broke, they disappeared. And yet, even in death, they inspired. In the wake of Jason David Frank's passing, the community changed. Panels at fan conventions began including grief counselors. More former cast members opened up about anxiety, burnout, and regret. The myth of the unbreakable hero was being replaced with something better: authenticity. It was okay to talk. It was okay to hurt. It was okay not to morph. And for many, that shift was overdue. Because behind every helmet was a human. And now, finally, people were listening. When tragedy strikes in Hollywood, the stories often disappear into vague explanations. Accident, overdose, private matter. But with the Power Rangers, fans and investigators alike began to look harder. The case of Ricardo Medina Jr. stands out. In 2015, he was arrested for the stabbing death of his roommate. The weapon? A sword. The motive? Disputed. Medina claimed self-defense. He said the argument escalated and he feared for his life. But prosecutors saw something else. A man obsessed with weapons. A history of erratic behavior. The grind of Hollywood. The exploitation of young talent. The way a colorful children's show became a factory for broken dreams. Many original cast members were paid little, received no residuals, and were replaced without warning. They were given fame, but not stability. Adoration, but not protection. And when the spotlight faded, most were left to navigate their trauma alone. Some found their way, others didn't. But the scars, emotional, financial, physical, never fully disappeared. The Power Rangers franchise continues today. New seasons, new casts, new merchandise. The colors are brighter, the villains are bigger, the tone, lighter. But under the helmets, the legacy is more complicated than ever. Because while the show teaches kids about teamwork, courage, and friendship, the real-life story teaches us something else, that heroes can hurt too. That behind every catchphrase and transformation, there might be a person quietly falling apart. And maybe, just maybe, that's the hardest truth to face. That the people who inspired us to be brave were barely holding on themselves. If there's one lesson the Power Rangers saga gives us, It's that light and darkness often exist side by side, even in the most vibrant worlds. So maybe, the next time you hear that iconic theme, take a second to remember the humans behind the helmets, the ones who smiled on screen and struggled off it. Because the truest morph was never into a ranger, it was into a survivor. In the years since, many former rangers have reclaimed their power, not through battle cries or explosions, but by telling the truth. They've opened up about anxiety, about financial ruin, about abuse. Some, like Amy Jo Johnson and David Yost, have become advocates, speaking at conventions not just for nostalgia, but for healing. Yost, who left the show after facing homophobia on set, now uses his platform to support LGBTQ+ youth. Others have stepped back from the spotlight entirely. And that's okay too, because the legacy of the Power Rangers isn't just about defeating monsters. It's about surviving the ones we never saw coming. It's about realizing that sometimes just getting through the day is a victory. The franchise may have started as a Japanese import and a savvy licensing deal, but what it became, for better or worse, was a cultural phenomenon built on the backs of real people. People who bled, who lost, who endured, and who still found the strength to stand up and say, "This was my story." Because in a world full of explosions and morphers and megazords, sometimes the most powerful transformation of all is learning to be human again.